a newborn left to die in the forest, and a wild wolf that did the unthinkable. When I heard a baby crying in the woods, my vision blurred because I realized this was no accident. I'd gone out just like any other evening, basket in hand, hunting for chanterelles among the pines. At nearly 60, I know this forest as well as I know my own heartbeat. Every rustle, every sigh of wind, every snapping twig. But that cry, sharp, desperate, cut through the dusk like a blade. My heart stopped, and for a split second I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it. Fear and disbelief clashed inside me. A baby? In these remote woods? It couldn't be. I froze, listening again. The crying came in ragged bursts, as if the infant was gasping for breath. My old instincts kicked in. Get closer, but stay hidden. I moved forward on familiar ground, treading quietly over moss and fallen needles. My palms sweat against the handle of my knife, though I doubted I'd ever need it for what waited ahead. Then I saw it. Nestled in a tangle of ferns, a tiny bundle wrapped in a thin, faded blanket. The crying paused as I knelt, my breath catching in my throat. The baby's skin was cold, pale under the pale blanket, but the cry resumed the moment I scooped him into my arms. He trembled against my chest, transparent whimpers that shot through me like ice. I scanned the clearing. There were footprints, slender, woman's footprints, leading deeper into the trees, then vanishing into undergrowth. A single tuft of dark hair lay caught on a bramble. No sign of anyone else. The woods were silent again, save for the soft patter of his sobs and the distant call of a barred owl settling for the night. My throat burned. I wanted to run back to my truck, dial for help, bring paramedics, child protective services, anything. But a shiver crawled down my spine. I wasn't alone. I felt eyes on me, something in the shadows behind the birches. Not human eyes, wild eyes. I hunched over the baby, shielding him with my body. My pulse hammered so loud I was sure he could hear it. I whispered, "It's okay, little one. I've got you." The moment the words left my lips, a low growl rolled through the trees. I jerked my head up. Between two trunks I caught a glimpse of fur, a gray shape the size of a large dog, but its gait was too graceful, too deliberate. My breath hitched, my fear warred with awe. This wolf, because it had to be a wolf, stood just out of reach of the moonlight. Its pale eyes shone with intelligence, and I felt it studying me as keenly as I studied it. My knife felt meaningless in my pocket. It tilted its head, as if questioning my right to hold this child. Then it gave a single, soft woof, like an exhalation of air, and stepped closer. My muscles locked. I expected it to lunge, but instead it lowered its head and sniffed the ground at my feet. Its muzzle brushed a patch of disturbed earth, as though it recognized the scent of the mother who'd fled. I looked back at the baby. He stared at me with bright, astonished eyes too big for his face. I realized I was shaking. Tears stung behind my eyelids. How had a newborn ended up here? Who would do such a thing? And why had the wolf come to this clearing at this very moment? Once again, the wolf glanced at me, then at the baby. A moment stretched, an eternity of shared uncertainty. And then the wolf stepped back, sitting on its haunches as if to say, "I will guard." I felt an almost physical weight lift from my chest. The baby settled against me, hiccuping once, then quieted. I rose to my feet. The baby cradled against my chest. The wolf rose too, pacing just beyond the circle of my lantern's glow. My rational mind screamed to retreat, to call for help, but my body stayed rooted. I felt an unspoken pact form between us. I would protect this child, and the wolf would ensure no harm came to us before dawn. I swallowed hard and started toward the path out, pausing to look back. The wolf watched me go, tail low but unthreatening, eyes glowing in the gloom. I felt I should say thank you. In that moment, I believed it understood. The path was narrow, winding through ancient trunks that loomed like silent sentinels. Every snap of a twig brought me to a standstill, but I kept going, guided by the soft rustle of leaves under my boots. With every step, I felt the wolf's gaze at my back, steadfast and unwavering. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, I burst from the tree line into the clearing where my truck was parked. The engine sat cold in the gathering darkness. I set the baby gently on the passenger seat, wrapping him tighter in my coat. Then I reached for my phone. "I've got a baby," I whispered into the dial tone, my voice trembling. "And I know something miraculous just happened." I thought I'd just call for help, and that would be the end of it. When I ended the call, and thought help was on the way, the wolf stepped into the lantern's glow. He was larger than I'd first realized, his coat a rippling silver in the dim light. I clutched the baby tighter, every muscle coiled, ready to fend him off. My knife felt suddenly inadequate in my pocket, yet he didn't growl or snarl. He simply stood, unmoving, and fixed me with that unblinking gaze. He wasn't looking at the baby, he was looking at me, as if testing which of us posed the greater threat. My heart thundered. I could almost feel his judgment weighing me, pack animal versus lone human. For a heartbeat, I considered fleeing, abandoning the child in the cab, but the wolf's eyes held me in place. Then he turned and padded away, slow and deliberate. 10 paces later, he stopped and glanced back, tail low, ears tilted forward, as if beckoning me to follow. Each time I paused, he would pause. Each time I took a step, he took one, vanishing into the thicket only to reappear at the next break in the trees. My skin crawled with fear and awe. "Follow," he seemed to say. "Trust me." I swallowed hard. My rational mind screamed that this was madness. Wild wolves don't guide humans. They kill or flee. But here he was, offering guidance. I unwrapped the baby slightly to check his breathing. His chest rose and fell, steady, warm. I whispered, "Stay with me, little one." And I rose from the truck's open door. My bones protested, but I forced myself to move, stepping off the gravel and into the forest floor. The wolf halted at the edge of a faint trail, then melted into the pines. I hesitated, scanning the darkness. No rescuers had arrived yet. No sirens, no headlights. Only that low rhythm of the wolf's paws on moss and pine needles. I told myself, if this leads to danger, I'll turn back. But something deep in me, a blend of fear, wonder, and curiosity, compelled me onward. For the next 10 minutes, we moved in uncanny tandem. Every so often, the wolf paused to sniff the earth, ears quivering at distant sounds. I noticed he was limping slightly on his right front paw. A jagged scar ran down his shoulder. He should have been in pain, but he showed no sign of weakness. Instead, he carried himself with a weary dignity. My chest tightened. Had he been hurt protecting cubs, or in a fight with another predator? I couldn't help but admire his resilience. He led me over a fallen log, past a stand of birch where moonlight pooled like liquid silver. My boots sank into damp earth, but the wolf moved effortlessly, as if floating above the ground. Then he paused again, directly in front of a gnarled oak. Its roots clawed at the soil, forming a shallow hollow beneath. The wolf lay down, looking back at me with those luminous eyes. I approached slowly, cradling the infant. My pulse rattled in my ears. I knelt beside him and peered into the hollow. At first I saw nothing but shadows. Then I noticed a rolled-up blanket, dark, muddy, and torn. Beneath it lay a small bundle of clothes, a tiny hat, a scrap of velvet. My breath caught. This was no random dumping ground. Someone had come here before me, someone with purpose. The wolf rose and nuzzled the edge of the hollow, letting out a soft woof. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely think. "You showed me this for a reason," I murmured. He dipped his head as if acknowledging my words, then slinked to one side and lay down again, blocking my exit path. A gust of wind stirred the branches overhead, and I half expected the baby to start crying again. But he lay quietly, eyes closed, trusting me. I felt a tremor of emotion, gratitude, fear, awe, all at once. This creature was more than a guide. He was a guardian. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe we were safe. I reached into the truck for my first aid kit, intending to mend the wolf's limp, repay his kindness. But when I returned, he was gone. No rustle, no crunch of leaves, just emptiness. I rose, scanning the darkness. My mind raced. Had I dreamed him? Was this forest playing tricks on me? Then I heard it, a soft thump, like a heartbeat from deeper in the woods. The baby stirred in my arms, sensing movement. I tipped the blanket back and saw him staring straight ahead, wide-eyed. Summoning my courage, I followed the sound. It led me past the oak, past the hollow, to a small clearing I hadn't noticed before. Moonlight revealed a circle of stones. In the center lay a worn journal, bound in leather. My breath hitched. Had the mother left this here, or someone else entirely? I reached out to touch it and felt the wolf's presence behind me. He leaned against my leg, heavy yet gentle. I looked down at him. His eyes held a question. Will you continue? I steadied my breath, pressing the baby to my chest. Lead on, I whispered. The wolf turned, our silent pact unbroken. But I had no idea where he would take me next, or what I would find. I was certain he was guiding me to his den, but I had no idea the truth waiting in its shadows. The fire crackled to life just as the last sliver of daylight vanished. My hands shook as I piled dry sticks, the baby curled safely against my chest. Darkness pressed in on all sides, and I hated every step I'd taken away from my truck. I thought I knew these woods, but now every sound felt like a threat. The wind whispered through the pines, and for a moment I swore I heard distant howls. I settled onto a rotted stump and laid the infant on a patchwork of jackets. He stirred, blinking wide eyes at the glow. I propped a flint in my lap and stared into the dancing flames, willing myself to feel calm. But fear hunched my shoulders. I was a 60-year-old man, once a forest ranger, and now I was crouched in the wilderness with a newborn and no path forward. The wolf had led me here, then vanished into the dark. I clenched my jaw, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake following him deeper. With no choice, I fed the fire more kindling and shifted to shield the child. I whispered, "We'll be okay," but my voice sounded hollow. Minutes stretched, and the forest fell silent. The fire's orange halo was a thin bubble against blackness. I thought of my cabin 10 miles away. Warm bed, locked doors, a radio. If only I'd turned back then. But that wolf's eyes had held me captive. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my own heart racing. An hour passed. The baby dozed, his tiny fingers curled. My eyelids grew heavy, and exhaustion tugged at me. I drifted into a half-sleep, the fire's hiss lulling me. Then, snap! A twig broke in the gloom. I bolted upright, heart in my throat. I blinked and saw him, the gray wolf, emerging like a wraith. In his jaws he carried a hare, limp and lifeless. He approached cautiously, every step measured, and placed the hare near the edge of the firelight. Then he turned and melted back into the trees. My breath caught. I knelt beside the offering, stomach twisting. "He fed us," I croaked, voice cracking, as if he knew I had no food for the baby. My mind reeled. This was no random act, no wild animal's whim. This was deliberate, compassionate. My rational mind protested, wolves don't feed humans. But here it was, the proof at my feet. I picked up a small piece of rabbit meat and passed it through my fingers. I remembered ancient tales, the ones I'd scoffed at, of wolves raising lost children, of forest spirits in fur coats guiding the helpless to safety. Those were bedtime stories. Yet on the moss, I held the veneer of myth in my hand. Guilt twisted me. I should fetch help, get real food, then return to this clearing. But I looked at the wolf's gift and realized I couldn't leave, couldn't risk losing his guidance. I ripped off bark to carve shavings for tinder and tossed tiny slivers onto the fire. Flames roared, and I felt tears stinging my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, though I doubted he could hear. I carefully warmed a shred of rabbit over the fire, too hot for a newborn, but I took a tiny bite. It tasted of earth and moonlight, raw and strange. I fed a few threads to the baby, murmuring encouragement. He took it instinctively, eyes half closed, and I felt a surge of hope. His warmth against me, the fire's glow, the wolf's unseen presence, it was enough to keep the terror at bay. As the night deepened, the crackle of fire became a lullaby. I leaned back against a tree, baby in arms, and watched embers rise like fireflies. I thought of home, of my wife's gentle laugh, of grandchildren I'd never met. All of that seemed distant now, replaced by this primal bond. Man, child, wolf, earth. Sleep claimed me in fits, the baby's soft breathing a counterpoint to my restless dreams. In one vision, I saw the wolf standing tall on a hill, moonbeams entwined in his fur, beckoning me onward. In another, I saw the mother's face, haunted, desperate, fading into mist. When I woke, the moon had shifted pale against the sky. The fire had burned low, embers glowing like red eyes. I stirred the ashes, collecting warmth for another hour. The baby was calm, already suckling gently when I offered my coat as pillow. I glanced into the forest. No movement, no sound, just silence, thicker than the night before. I closed my eyes and prayed for dawn. My mind raced ahead, rescuers arriving, a hospital, explanations, questions. But I knew this wasn't the end. It never had been. I shook off the last of my exhaustion and gathered myself. In the morning, we find help, I promised. Yet my heart pounded, not with fear now, but anticipation. What had begun as an impossible rescue would reveal truths I could not yet imagine. I was certain morning would change everything. But nature had something far greater in store for us. I woke to a low, rolling growl. My eyes snapped open to the dim gray of pre-dawn. The fire had died to glowing embers between us, and the baby slept soundly against my chest. My skin prickled with unease as I scanned the clearing. Then I saw them. 2 wolves stood just beyond the fire's reach, forming a silent ring around us. Their coats were darker than the lone wolf's silver, deep charcoal flecked with steel, and their eyes glowed with fierce intelligence. One flared his jaws at a rustling in the underbrush, a lynx, curious and hungry, edging toward our meager warmth. The lynx froze, then turned to slink away. But before it could vanish, the nearer wolf lunged, teeth bared, forcing the cat back into the shadows. The intruder vanished with a final snarl, and the 2 wolves resumed their quiet vigil. My heart thundered so loudly, I feared the baby would wake. I pressed him tighter, marveling at the scene. I realized then, they weren't just leaving us alone. They were protecting us. Not a single hair on that lynx had dared break the circle. My breath caught. "We're under their guard," I whispered, voice trembling. "They're not just not attacking, they're defending us." I sat up slowly, careful not to startle the wolves. The firelight flickered across their stern profiles. One wolf, his fur mottled with scars, locked eyes with me. I felt his gaze pierce every layer of my being. In that moment, I understood something profound. This wasn't a random act of survival. This was a pact, a promise from the wild itself. I thought back on the countless mornings I'd patrolled these woods, scaring off poachers, tracking wounded animals, healing injured birds. I prided myself on knowing this land, but now I was a foreigner in my own domain, humbled by its true masters. I swallowed hard, feeling tears well up. "Thank you," I breathed, but no human should hear, only them. The baby stirred, and I pressed my palm against his back. He yawned, tiny fist curling around my finger. I glanced to my protectors. They relaxed, tails low but unmoving, yet remained between us and the forest's edge. It was as though they stood watch every heartbeat of the world. I remembered old lore, wolves as guardians of the lost, guides for the bewildered. I dismissed these tales as superstition. Now, I felt their truth in my bones. The wolf at my front nudged a stray ember toward me, as if saying, "Keep the flame alive." I gathered a few twigs and relit the fire, its glow warming my chilled limbs. Dawn's pale light seeped through branches, and the forest woke with birdsong. I dared to lower my guard, checking on the wolves. They sat like sentinels. One lifted his head and howled, a long, mournful note that echoed between trees. The other joined for a second before silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "That's your signal," I murmured to the baby. He blinked sleepy eyes at me and cooed. I smiled through tears. I had planned to call for help at first light, but I hesitated. What would rescuers make of this scene? A man who followed a wolf through the night, sheltered by its pack? They'd think I'd gone mad. Yet I felt sure these wolves meant no harm. They had watched over us when I could scarce protect myself. My logic argued, fetch help, explain, return, but my heart whispered, stay and learn what this story truly is. I rose, folding my jacket into a makeshift pillow for the baby. The wolves did not move. I took a cautious step toward the edge of the clearing, then looked back. They met my gaze in unison, steady, unwavering. "I won't forget you," I promised. I bent to scoop up the baby and cradle him to my shoulder. My legs shook as I prepared to leave the clearing. "We should go," I whispered, tears dampening his forehead. The wolves stood and parted just enough for me to pass. Their bodies formed a living corridor, guiding me toward the path I'd taken in. I paused at the tree line. The silver wolf I'd first followed emerged from the shadows, eyes gleaming. He took one step forward, closer than any of the others had dared, and stared into my eyes. Time stopped. I felt the pulse of his world beat against mine. Then, as the first rays of sun filtered through the pines, he turned and melted into the undergrowth. The other wolves lingered a moment longer, then slipped away like mist. I exhaled, relief and wonder flooding me. I scooped the baby tighter and planted one foot on the path. They just won't harm us, I thought, heart light. They simply refused to. I was certain they merely chose not to attack, but their true gift was much, much greater. I burst into the clearing beyond the pines, branches cracking under my boots, heart hammering against my ribs. A cluster of rescuers, flashlights bobbing, radios crackling, froze as I stumbled into their circle of light. I pressed the baby to my chest and shouted, "Over here! I've got the child!" Their faces blurred into urgency and relief, and I let out a shaky breath, believing I was safe at last. They moved toward me in unison, voices calling for medical aid, for fire crews, for backup. I felt the baby stir, soft whimpers against my coat, and I eased him upward, murmuring reassurance. A paramedic knelt beside me, gloved hands gentle as they took the infant. I reached to let go, expecting him to vanish into their arms, our peril finally over. Then a sound stopped me, a low, steady scrape of underbrush. I turned, eyes wide. Emerging from the tree line, the silver wolf stepped into the beam of a spotlight, every muscle taut. He paused at the edge of the circle, ears pricked, nostrils flaring as he assessed the scene. My breath caught. Here he was again, our midnight guide, our silent sentinel. The rescuers stiffened. Flashlights swung toward him, Shouts cracked. "Get back! Weapon, draw!" I heard the unmistakable click of rifles being readied. The wolf's gaze shifted from me to the humans and back again, unflinching. In that terrible heartbeat, tension coiled around us like a whip. I dropped to one knee in the mud, hands raised, voice trembling. "Don't shoot! He saved us!" My plea echoed through the clearing. The wolf's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and under the spotlight, his fur shimmered like moonlight on water. I held the rescuer's eyes, words catching in my throat. This wolf, he led me here. He protected my son. He brought us to you. One of the paramedics hesitated, rifle trembling in his hands. Another lowered her flashlight, revealing a face etched with disbelief and awe. I stared back at them, my own disbelief burning bright. A wild animal standing guard over a human child, refusing harm. My heart thundered so loud, I was sure they heard it too. The wolf took a single slow step forward, as if acknowledging my words. His eyes held a gentle fierceness, and I felt the truth pulse through me. He was more than predator or prey. He was guardian, guide, miracle incarnate. A rescue team leader barked an order, but his voice faltered as he saw my open palms, and the boy clutched to my chest. He swallowed hard, glance flicking to the wolf, then back to me. I seized the moment, voice steadying. "He's part of this story. Please let him live." The paramedic lowered her rifle, and the leader gave a curt nod. Tears stung my eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of something raw and larger than fear. The baby drifted asleep, safe in human arms. I stood slowly, meeting the wolf's gaze one last time. He held my look for a breath that stretched into eternity, then drew back into the forest's fringe. The rescuers exhaled, voices soft with wonder. I watched him disappear into shadow, silhouette dissolving among the trees. My legs trembled, and I sank to the ground, head spinning. I thought this was it, that the child was safe, the wolf vanished, and our story could finally be told like any other rescue. I closed my eyes, pressing a hand to my heart. I thought this was the end, that now the authorities would take the baby. I'd answer their questions, and I'd return home changed but whole. But the wolf had shown me that night was only our beginning. I sat stiffly on the edge of the cot in the cramped hospital room, the newborn swaddled in a tiny blanket against my chest. A police detective hovered by the door, face etched with regret. "His mother," she began softly. She's a known addict. She left him in the woods when he was just days old. We found her car abandoned at the trailhead. She vanished into the night." My throat closed. "And the doctors, how is he?" She hesitated, glancing at the isolette's soft hum. "He was premature. Without constant warmth, without feeding, he would not have lasted until morning." I pressed a hand to my heart. "If not for the wolf," my voice cracked. "If he hadn't found us, he'd be gone. It's certain." Tears pooled behind my eyes. The detective offered a sad smile. "You did what no one else could. He owes his life to you, and it seems to some extraordinary guardian outside." I nodded numbly, staring down at the fragile life in my arms. His chest rose and fell on its own, a miracle I could barely grasp. Memories flooded back, the fire's glow, the silver wolf's watchful eyes, the silent march through the trees. I'd told myself the wolf was a guide, a protector. Now, hearing the truth of the baby's odds, I knew it was more than sentiment. It was fate. That night, after they discharged me, I carried the baby home. My little cottage on the edge of the forest loomed under a star-strewn sky. I lit a lamp and settled him in his crib by the window. His breathing was peaceful, a soft rhythm that soothed my frayed nerves. I crept to the window and peered out. The forest lay black and still, shadows pooling like ink. The weight of the past nights pressed on me. I closed my eyes, willing him to sleep. Then, there, a silhouette gliding between the trunks. My breath caught. The silver wolf stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the garden fence. He stared up at the house, his form outlined by the moon, his ears pricked, nose lifted, as if savoring the scent of the baby inside. My heart thundered. I'd always thought our encounter was over once help arrived. But here he was, on my doorstep, returning to the home where the child now lay. I opened the window a crack. "I'm here," I whispered, voice trembling. I kept my promise. The baby stirred, but I shushed him gently. The wolf sat on his haunches, poised and silent. Our eyes met across the glass. In his gaze, I saw something that went beyond gratitude, a solemn vow, a bond that transcended words. He lifted his head and let out a single, soft howl, a song that resonated through the night air. It was neither mournful nor joyous, but something between, a farewell and a benediction. I felt tears slide down my cheeks. The weight of wonder and sorrow pressed me to my knees. Then, as silently as he'd arrived, he turned and vanished into the darkness of the trees. The forest swallowed him whole. I pressed my forehead against the cool window pane, chest tight with emotion. I thought he came to say goodbye, but even as I uttered that, I sensed I was wrong. This was no final farewell. This was the beginning of something I could not yet name. I sank onto the floor, arms wrapped around my knees. The baby cooed softly in his crib behind me. Dawn was still hours away, and the hush of the house felt sacred. I realized that every heartbeat in that room carried the wolf's legacy, the miracle of survival, the wild's unexpected grace. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." The words hung in the air, fragile and true. Outside, the forest stood guard, its secrets buried beneath moonlight and shadow. I lay back, letting exhaustion claim me, the baby's soft breaths lulling me towards sleep. In my mind, I replayed the nights we had shared, the fire, the gift of a hare, the circling pack, the silent escort to safety. Each memory glowed like embers in the dark, and deep inside, I knew the wolf's final lesson had yet to come. This was not an end. This was only the beginning of a story that would shape both our lives forever. I never once considered handing him over to strangers. When the social worker gently asked if I'd thought about foster care or the system, I looked her in the eye and said, "If nature saved him, I won't abandon him now." The words felt like a vow carved into my heart. They nodded, pens poised, but there was no changing my mind. This child belonged with a man who'd carried him through the wilderness, guided by a wolf's mercy. Those first months passed in a blur of diapers and lullabies. He was a quiet boy, his big eyes always alert, watching the world as if waiting for someone or something to appear. He never cried without reason, and when he did, it was a steady plea rather than a frantic wail. His small hand would reach for mine, and I'd feel an ache of protectiveness deepen in my chest. On his first birthday, I took him to the edge of the forest. He sat in my lap on an old stump, clutching a soft blanket that smelled of wood smoke and home. "Do you remember?" I whispered. He breathed in the pine-scented air and pressed his cheek to my shoulder, as if recalling dreams he'd never shared aloud. As he grew into toddling steps, his fascination with the trees became clear. Whenever we passed the path that led to my cabin, he'd stop, look back over his shoulder, and reach out his hand, silent but insistent. I'd scoop him up and carry him forward, heart torn between relief and longing. Every time he saw the darkening tree line, his eyes brightened. One afternoon, I lost sight of him for just a moment. Panic stabbed through me as I called his name, breath ragged. I found him at the edge of the woods, crouched in a patch of ferns, examining something in his tiny fist. My stomach sank. Had he wandered too far? But when I knelt beside him, he held out a strip of gray fur, soft as silk. "Look, Papa," he said in his quiet voice. He ran a finger along the edge, and I recognized it instantly. The same silvery pelt that glowed like moonlight on the wolf's back. My throat tightened. He gazed up at the forest, clutching the fur to his chest. His eyes brimmed with wonder and trust. He watched over me, I whispered, recalling that first night by the fire. He covered you with his coat when you were cold. Tears blurred my vision as I realized the boy understood something I still struggled to believe, that the wild had become his family. He looked at me with such certainty, as if he knew the forest held his origins. It was more than a child's imagination. It was the echo of a bond forged under stars and guarded by silent paws. That night, as I tucked him into bed, he pressed the fur against his cheek. "Papa," he murmured, "I want to see him again." My heart clenched. I knew the path. I knew where he'd first found us. "Someday," I promised, brushing hair from his forehead, but the word felt hollow. How could I take him back to those shadows, to that place of miracles, without my own heart breaking open again? In the weeks that followed, I watched him grow stronger, each milestone a soft celebration. His first words were spoken in a whisper of awe. "Wolf." He'd point toward the woods, and I'd see memory shimmer in his eyes. He ran faster than other children, his small legs pumping like he was chasing something only he could see. Every night, he fell asleep clutching the scrap of fur. I'd sit by his bed, worn journal in hand, and tell him the story of how he came to us, lost and alone, saved by a wolf who traded danger for guidance. His breathing slowed as my voice carried him into dreams. One evening, he sat at the window, gaze fixed on the dark tree line. Moonlight painted his face in silver. He turned to me, eyes shining with conviction. "He's out there," he said, voice trembling with certainty. "He watches." I felt tears well. "I believe you," I said, voice thick. In that moment, I understood the depth of our transformation. We were a family born of wilderness and wonder, bound by a promise neither man nor wolf could break. He looked back to the forest, silent and still, and I saw his tiny chest rise with a calm confidence I could only envy. He trusted in something greater than us, something wild and wise that lived beyond our world. I wrapped an arm around him and whispered into the night air, as much to myself as to him, "We'll never forget." In his eyes, I saw that yes, he knew, and that we both were forever changed by a bond no one else could see. The day my son turned 6 dawned crisp and golden, as if the forest itself celebrated with us. We walked the familiar path beneath towering pines, his small hand clasped in mine. His laughter tinkled like bells with each crunchy step through fallen needles. I told him stories of his first night in the woods, of the wolf who saved him, but he only nodded, eyes bright with childhood wonder. Halfway along the trail, he stopped so suddenly that I nearly stumbled over him. He pressed a finger to his lips and whispered, "Dad, it's him." My heart seized. Ahead, bathed in morning light, stood the wolf. Older now, his silver fur flecked with white, shoulders stooped as if bearing the weight of years. He stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on my boy. I felt tears sting my eyes. The forest held its breath. The wolf lowered his head until his muzzle touched the earth, a solemn bow that resonated deep in my chest. My son stepped forward, each barefoot footfall silent on the soft moss. He placed his small palm on the wolf's forehead, as if offering thanks across the boundary between two worlds. The wolf's eyes closed in what felt like peaceful acceptance. For a moment, time dissolved. I stood behind my son, unable to speak, consumed by the wonder of that communion. The wolf then rose, its body long and lithe, and turned slowly away. It paused at the edge of the clearing, cast one last glance toward us, and slipped into the forest's green shadows. I watched until even the sound of its footsteps faded, until the pines swayed without its presence. My son looked up at me, eyes shining with wonder, and something older than words. I knelt beside him and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. He didn't speak, neither did I. We simply stood there, bound by the unspoken truth of what we'd witnessed. A wind stirred the leaves, and I closed my eyes, feeling the echo of the wolf's farewell pulse through my veins. I thought such a thing could not happen, but I saw it with my own eyes. He came to say goodbye. He passed his guardian role to me. If your heart is racing now, you understand. Subscribe to this channel. Here, we tell the truth. Nature is full of mysteries. If you too believe in a special bond with animals, we are not alone in this world.